Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the conference organizer, especially Dr. Todorovic and my colleague, Dr. Vasilius, for their kind invitation to speak to you on this very important issue. I'm going to talk on an Islamic perspective on stem cell research, and at the end of my presentation, I will focus on the work we are doing in terms of ethical issues, regulation on stem cell research in my country, Iran. In this presentation, I will start with a brief introduction, and then I will explain about Islamic jurisprudence, just to explain how in Islamic society laws are drawn up and regulations are made, and then I will talk about the newly emerged problems in medicine and to explain how we deal with this in our Islamic society. At the end of my presentation, I will focus on stem cell research and we'll talk about the draft regulations which we are working on at this time. Let's talk with Islamic jurisprudence. Islamic laws, or Sharia, deals with ideology and faith, behavior and manners, and everyday practical matters. Fatwa also is a non-binding legal opinion which has been issued by a faqih, or usually a grand ayatollah, in reply to a question. These are the sources of Islamic jurisprudence: the Holy Quran, which revealed by God the Almighty to the Prophet Muhammad; Sunnah, which is the Prophet's action and the description of the life and example of the Prophet Muhammad; and the third one, which is consensus or ijma, which is in fact a general agreement among Islamic ulama and grand ayatollahs. This principle, do no harm, which is called the principle of la dharara wa la dhirar fil Islam, this principle plays a great role in Islamic jurisprudence, especially when we deal with the newly emerged problem in medicine. It's in somehow exactly the same with the principle of non-maleficence. Just to mention that newly emerged problems are issues which hasn't been dealt in original text in Islam, because Islamic regulations are originally expressed as certain general principles and they are not usually expounded in details. For example, praying, if you consider praying, in Quran it's mentioned that Muslims must pray 5 times in a day, but the details hasn't been explained in the Holy Quran. And the newly emerged problems, these are the issues and problems that emerge along with the progress of human knowledge and technology. For example, if you look at the banking system, there wasn't such a system in from the beginning of Islam, and this type of services came along with the industrialization in different societies, and how we deal with this. These are kind of newly emerged issues which hasn't been in the primary source of Islam directly. And also there is no textual ordinance offering explicit guidance regarding those issues. And that's why it's a matter that fell in the domain of juristic discretion or ijtihad, which in this case a question will be raised to a grand ayatollah, and he would search in the primary sources of Islam and will give the answer what to do, and this answer is called fatwa, as mentioned earlier. And just let's talk about how we deal with this newly emerged problem in our Islamic society. There are 2 committees, a committee of jurists and also a committee of medical specialists, which if there is a newly emerged problem or issue, for example, brain death, which hasn't been explained in the primary source of Islam, whether brain death is equal to human death or not, or for example for family planning, whether family planning is prohibited or it's approved by Islamic regulations, then the responsibility of the medical specialist committee is to define the problem and explain it to the committee of Islamic jurists, and then they would search among the primary sources of Islam. They would have discussions among themselves, and based on the question and based on the primary source of Islam, they will give the answer what to do in that particular matter. As mentioned, brain death would be a very good example to just explain how we deal with these issues. There is no definitive directives from revealed text on brain death. First, the medical specialist team would explain the problem of the brain death and the state and conditions in which the patient is to the faqih, or the jurist, a committee of jurists. And then this committee or Grand Ayatollah would express his legal opinion on the basis of his perception of the problem and the question by utilizing the Islamic sources. And now let's focus on stem cell research, which is the main topic of this conference. To answer this, to answer the question whether we can do research on a stem cell, we will see other questions which have to be answered first. What is a stem cell? The moral status of embryo, the issue of personhood and human being. The question would be, is an embryo a human being? If yes, then how about the human rights? From what time we have to give them human rights? The issue of risk-benefit assessment, and we have in this issue we have to focus on who would benefit from the stem cell, for example, and also the issue of trust, which is really a very important issue. Trust between researchers, medical doctors, and the society. It's really a key issue when dealing with the stem cell research. Regarding moral status of embryo and human being, Quran says, "And indeed we created man from a quintessence of clay. Then we placed him as a small quantity of liquid, which is nutfa, in a safe lodging firmly established. Then we have fashioned the nutfa into something which clings, which is called alaka. Then we made alaka into the chewed lump of flesh, which is called mudgha, and we made out of that chewed lump of flesh into bones and clothed the bones with flesh, and then we brought it forth as another creation. So blessed be God, the best to create." In terms of the moral status of embryo, in Islam, we consider human life as valuable and as deserving of protection from conception onwards. However, the installment has been considered as the point to recognize a fetus as a human being. Installment would take place around 120 days after conception, and as you know, this is the point for abortion, because if there is some reasons, for example, if the mother's life is in danger, before 120 days of pregnancy, which is almost 4 months of pregnancy, abortion is permitted under certain conditions. But after this time, which is 4 months of pregnancy, abortion is not permitted. In the case of the stem cell research, specifically for the purpose of relieving human disease and scale of problem benefit outweighs possible harm. That's why in our Islamic society it's been accepted that the therapeutic cloning should be permitted, because there are huge benefits to humans if we can cure some diseases which is not at this time we do not have treatment for those diseases. But in terms of reproductive stem cell research, it's forbidden, but it's because of the ethical issues involved, not because we may play God. If you remember, at the early discussion on stem cell in Islamic societies, the issue was if we do cloning, if we clone human being, then it's the same as playing God. But after that, Islamic jurists, they realized that the issues involved are ethical and legal issues. That's why therapeutic reproductive stem cell research or reproductive cloning should be banned, but not because we may play God. And this is not the reason at this time for the prohibition on stem cell research in my country, for example. In Iran, we are working on a draft regulations, which is mostly on ethical issues regarding stem cell research in Iran. The draft regulation starts with introducing the resources available for stem cell research, which I will mention in my presentation. And then it goes to the definitions. It defines embryo. It defines all terminologies which is related to stem cell research. And in continue, there is a general rules for scientists who would like to work on stem cell research, and then it goes to specific rules, which is divided into two sections. One section is ethical issues in stem cell research, and the second is the second part is ethical issues in stem cell therapy. As you may know, there are some centers, medical centers in my country, which they are working on stem cell therapy. One of the research which I can mention here is working on stem cell therapy for diabetes. In terms of resources, the draft regulations introduces IVF surplus embryos for stem cell research. Spontaneous aborted fetus also is the second source, and also somatic cell nuclear transfer is the third one, and IPS. It defines all these resources and explain in detail what are these terminologies and what are these resources for stem cell research for scientists who would like to work in this issue. In the second part, which is general rules, it says that only surplus embryo from IVF should be used for stem cell research by scientists. Embryos should not be created for research, and also commercialization of embryos is banned. There is prohibition of payment for embryos to the individual who donate their embryos, their gametes, and also to the research centers who would work on stem cell research. Nobody can pay money to the donors. Stem cell research also should be done in the university, public university hospitals, and private research institutes, and private hospitals are banned to work on stem cell research in my country. Parents' informed consent should be obtained. There's prohibition of reproductive cloning in this regulation. As I mentioned, in Islamic jurisprudence, reproductive cloning is not permitted. Confidentiality also has to be observed. In the next part of the draft regulation, we talk on specific rules, which is ethical issues in stem cell research and also ethical issues in stem cell therapy. In terms of ethical issues in stem cell research, National Ethics Committee's approval has to be obtained for stem cell research by the scientists who would like to work on this field. And also human dignity has to be respected. Informed consent should be obtained with the full information disclosure. All details have to be provided to the individuals who would like to donate their biological samples for stem cell research. Privacy and confidentiality are really important to be and have to be observed. There is an article to urge scientists to provide insurance for the donors. Social justice has to be taken into consideration, and also priority setting. The question whether the research that a scientist or research institute would like to work on is based on the health problem in the country or not. It's an issue which the National Ethics Committee, which is in charge of approval of the stem cell research, has to take into account. In terms of ethical issues in stem cell therapy, also National Ethics Committee approval is needed. It's recommended to have preclinical trials or animal study if it's needed for stem cell therapy. Informed consent with a full disclosure has to be provided to the donors, and also the research institute has to provide a long-term follow-up for the donors as well. Still, as I mentioned earlier, this is the draft regulation, and we are still working on to finalize the regulations on stem cell research in my country. And I would like to thank you for your kind attention, and I hope it was possible to present my talk in person there, and sorry to have just as a video conference. However, my email address is on the screen, and if you have any question, I would be glad to answer your question and to be in touch with you, and thank you again.